Hello my fellow gnomes, welcome to another video. Today we are making a round-based zombie infection game, perfect for Halloween perhaps. It was all made for this tutorial, very simple to make actually, and the map here, there'll be a link to this in the description of kit so you can get started or you can just follow along. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, so this is our starting place. It's a pretty basic map. Now, before we get into the actual scripting, we need to organize it a little bit. So I've got a weapons folder and a zombie folder. This is a zombie we're going to use today. Now, the weapons, you can put anything you like in here. I've just got this shotgun at the moment. Whatever we put in here, we're going to give to the players on the survivor team. But we're going to take the weapons and the zombie and move them into server script service. We don't need them to be in the game world. Now, before we get into the scripting, one thing to bear in mind is that I'm assuming you have a certain level of scripting knowledge here. So if this is your first time scripting, I'd recommend checking out my beginner's guide first, which will help make this video make a lot more sense to you. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and create our game loop script. And we might as well move both of these items as children of the script, because we only need the one script here. And we're also going to need to have our output open because we're doing scripting. We want to see if there are any errors, of course. So we're going to start out just by laying out the sort of basis for our script. So we're going to need the player's service. And then we're going to define some sort of global variables for how long we want the round to last. Now I'm typing these in all caps. It's kind of like a bit of a tradition on Roblox that you use all caps when you're talking about globals or constants, things that you're probably not going to want to change. They're more just like settings that you have, and it makes them very visible if you want to then edit them later. So we'll have 10 seconds for the intermission, 1 minute for the round, and then we'll have a minimum players as well. Set that to 2, and then we're going to have a function for starting the game. We're going to have a function as for ending the game, a function for the intermission, and these three functions combined are we're just gonna loop between all of them. So we're going to call the intermission function straight away, and then that's going to wait and see if we have the minimum players. So let's write a loop for that. We'll say while, and we need to get all the players in the game. So player service, get players. That gives us a table. We want to know how many are in the table. So we use the hashtag get players is greater or equal to the min players value. Actually, we want to check while it's less than the minimum players, then we want to keep waiting. So we'll just throw in a print to demonstrate waiting for players ... and then we'll throw in a test.wait 1 second. And then once we do have enough players, we want to start our timer for the intermission. Using our intermission duration, we're going to create a for loop for I, and we'll set it starting off rather than 1. We'll set it equal to the intermission duration. We want it to go down to 1, and we're going to reduce it by -1 each time. And so we can print out there the intermission and the value of I. And then again, we're just going to have a task wait.1. Otherwise, we're going to run through this loop all in one go. Now, while this intermission period is running, it's possible somebody might have left the game. So we're going to check the amount of players in the game again. So we can copy this line. But instead of checking if it's less than, we want it to be greater than or equal to this time. So if we have enough players, then we can call that start game function. But otherwise, if we don't, if someone has left, if we no longer have enough players, then we're just going to restart the intermission. So we'll call the function again, and the whole process starts all over. Now let's go to our start game function. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to have some sort of value to keep track of what the current state of the game is. We could use a variable for this, but I'm actually going to use an attribute here. So workspace set attribute, and I'm going to say game running, and we'll set it to true. Now we're going to want to teleport the player in and maybe set them up and all the kind of starting of the game logic. But for now, all we're going to do is we're just going to put in another timer. So we're going to copy that timer, paste that in here. But instead of it being intermission duration, we want it to be round duration. And we'll change this print statement to say game. And then when the game is ended, or rather the timer has finished, then we want to call the end game function. And what we're going to do in the end game function, well, we're going to want to clear up a few things. But for now, let's just set this attribute to false and head back to the intermission. So there we go. That is a very basic little round script already running. Before we go any further, let's just change the minimum players down to 1 so we can test a bit easier. So if I just click test and I click play, I should then spawn inside of the box and we can see straight away we've got the intermission 10, 9, 8 and it's going to count down all the way to 1 as we expect. When we reach there, it's going to start the game counter and it's going to count down for a minute. We don't want to wait for that whole time, so we'll go ahead and hit stop. And of course, if the minimum players was 2 as it's supposed to be, then we're not going to have that counter one at all. We're just going to be stuck with the waiting for players text. Now, of course, you might have noticed that we have this spawn box up here, which has a spawn location inside of it. But on the map, I don't have any actual spawns. What I do have is I have these folder. Inside the map folder, I have something called spawns. I have survivor and zombie spawns. So we got the zombie ones over here. There's one, and there's another one, and there's another one. These are all just parts. They're invisible at the moment, so I can make them visible so you can see them, but they're just anchored and they have the collisions disabled. And we're just using these as position references so we can tell the player to move to this position. Now we're not using spawn locations because we don't really need to control the spawn logic. I'm quite happy for everyone to spawn inside this box, and then we can manually set whether or not we want them to be on the map according to whatever state the game is in. So we need to start teleporting our players into that game map, but before we do, we need to decide who is the survivor team and who is the zombie team. Now, for this game, we're just going to choose one player, one random player to be the zombie, and everyone else is going to be the survivor. So let's go to our start game function, and first of all, we need to get all the players in the game again. Now, I'm actually going to create a variable for this just to save me typing it multiple times. So all players is equal to players get players. I'm going to create a new random object. And then I want a random player. So I'm going to get this table of all the players. I'm going to use these square brackets to index it. And then I want a random value next integer between 1 and the total number of all players. So that's all players with that hash in front of it. And now I've got that random player, let's turn them into a zombie. And I'm going to actually break this out into a new function just so things don't get quite so cluttered. So let's have one called spawn zombie. And this is actually going to have a parameter, which is going to be the player. So we can send that now down below. We can start saying, oh, let's just close off the function there. There we go, got an end. And then now we can say spawn zombie and provide that random player that we just found. So in our spawn zombie script, we're going to use this zombie model that I have. That's a child, so that makes it nice and easy. We can say local zombie equals script.zombie, and we're going to create a new copy. So we use the clone method. And in order to make the player use this new model as their character, we need to say player.character, and we'll set it to equal the zombie. And then we need to add the zombie into the game world. So zombie.parent equals workspace. And so that we can keep track of who this player is and who is the zombie, we're going to say player, and we're going to use set attribute, and we'll say is zombie, set that to true, which will be handy later. Now at the moment we haven't provided a position for it, so currently if I run the game, let's just try that. We'll set the minimum players to 1, and we'll turn down the intermission just for testing. If I'm playing 3, 2, 1, and I'm now the zombie, and I'm going to fall from the sky, which is where I had placed the zombie. But that's not really what I want. Right, if I move it into the workspace again, you'll see that's just where it happens to be. But I don't want my zombie falling from the sky. I want him to go to one of my spawn points. I've got 4 of them dotted around the map. So let's create a function to get ourselves a random spawn location, depending on whether you're a survivor or a zombie. So we'll add in a new function, local function get spawn location. And this will have as a parameter your class. So the logic for this is going to look a little bit like where we selected the random player. So in fact, let's copy that. And instead of getting all the players, this time we want to get all the spawns. And we want to go to workspace dot map dot spawns. And then we need to access either survivor or zombie. And I would use find first child, but in this case, because I know the thing exists and we're on the server and we trust the data being sent, I can just simply add the class in these square brackets like so. And then I can get all the children contained within that folder. And then instead of getting a random player, obviously I'm getting a random spawn. So we'll rename that. And then we'll use this all spawns table. And we want a random value between 1 and the total number of spawns. So we'll get one of these random parts. And actually, we don't want this to be a variable. We can actually just return this straight away. So to use this function, all we need to say is zombie, and we can say pivot to, which is going to set the target C frame of this this new character we created, and then we're going to immediately call the get spawn location, because pivot to would normally require a C frame, but here we're going to return this part, and we'll return the C frame along with it. So we can actually just say pivot to get spawn location zombie, and then we can reuse this function for spawning in all our players. So after we've spawned in the zombie, we'll create another loop for I player in pairs, and we use the all players value again. Now, since we only want to spawn in players who aren't a zombie, we need to take note of this attribute we've just created. So we'll say if that player, and we get an attribute called is zombie, and we find it to be equal to true, then continue, and we're just going to keep going, and we won't do any of this other code that's below. It's just going to go to the next player within the all players table. So this is quite handy. Now we could write it like this in a block. We could say if it's equal to false and put all our code in here, but you end up with a lot of blocks of nested code. So doing it this style is called a guard clause, and it just helps to keep your code nice and tidy. You can just tuck this out the way and then focus on the code that actually matters, which in this case is teleporting them. So player dot character pivot to, and this time we're going to use get spawn location, but instead of zombie, it is survivor. And while we're at it, we should probably set an attribute for the player to keep track of them. And so this will be is survivor, and we'll set that equal to true. The only next thing to do is to give them their weapons. So the weapons are in a folder inside of the game loop script. So let's create a little loop now for I weapon in pairs script dot weapons get children and we want to clone all of them. So take that weapon, clone it, create a copy, and set the parent to player.backpack. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this loop into our endgame function, just so we can do a little bit of cleaning up. So obviously we need to change that to players get players because we can't access the all players variable anymore. And we're going to set both is survivor and is zombie back to false now, just to clean up. And we don't need to pivot them anywhere, but it probably would help to reload the character. So we can call the load character function, and then we don't want to give them any weapons. Instead, we want to get rid of their weapons. So if we say player.backpack and we clear all children, that will remove any weapons that they have on them. So let's just check that all of our game logic is working. We're going to set the round duration down to 5 seconds as well. And we'll keep the minimum players at 1. So if we just test with a single player, we should see intermission counts down. And then we should get selected as the zombie because there's only 1 player. There we go. We're over here. And then when the timer runs out, if we look in the output, we should get reloaded back into the spawn box. And then the game's just going to keep on running. And look, here we are. We're in a new spawn location now. We can zoom around as the zombie, back to the spawn, and so on. Now, if we want to test as a player or as a survivor class, then we're going to need some more players. So let's set the minimum players back to 2. We'll increase the round duration just to make this a bit easier to test. Now, what we can do is we can use this second lot of testing features over here, which allows us to create a local server. So if I just click start over here, what Roblox is going to do is it's going to emulate some players now. It's going to host a local version of the server, and it's going to give me some fake friends to play about with. So here we are. If we attack with our zombie, well, nothing's going to happen because we haven't written any code to do that yet. And if we shoot him with a gun, we can kill him. But nothing's going to happen there either. He's just going to eventually respawn. So we kind of we've got our round logic working, but we haven't got a game yet. It's just an endless loop. There's not really any win or lose potential, and we want to make an infection game. So what we're going to do is we'll click cleanup. That'll get rid of all of these windows for us, and we're going to go back into our script. And now we want to handle the zombie infecting the other players. I'm going to use the zombie.humanoid.touched method. Now, touched isn't the most accurate of systems you could use here, but for our purposes, right, we're just wanting a quick game system up and working. For this tutorial, this works perfectly fine for us. So the touched function or event, sorry, gives us this hit element, right? The part that has touched our zombie. So we want to check if the thing that it's hit is a zombie, or if it is a survivor, or if it's a player at all. So first off, let's see if it's a player. So the player should equal player service, and we can use this handy function get player from character, and that would probably be the hit.parent, because if we touch, say, some limb, right, some head part, then the parent of that should be the character object. So, but if it's not a player, then we can return end. That's another one of those guard clauses. We want to get out of this function. We're not interested. Now, the next thing we want to check is if it's a survivor. So, if not player dot get attribute is survivor, or actually we could even say if it's equal false. You could type it either way. It's up to you, but we'll do it that way. Why not? Then return end. Or a third way you could write this is you could check if it's zombie and that equals true, then return end. As with all things in programming, there's like 20 different ways you can write your logic and still have exactly the same outcome. So let's go with this. If it's a zombie, then we'll ignore it, because a zombie obviously can't attack another zombie. So if it is a survivor, then we can actually just call this spawn zombie function using this new player variable we've created, which may be a bit confusing because we have player nested inside here. We define player, and then we also define player up here. But it's important to remember, because this is in a new block and we said local again, this is within a different scope. So this player is actually different to this player. So we'll spawn the zombie using that player, and we also need to disable their attribute of is survivor. So is survivor, we need to set that back to false. And since we've just infected a player, we should probably check if there's any other survivors left in the game. Otherwise, there's no point keeping that timer running. So let's create a quick counter, local survivors equals 0, and then we'll just loop through all of the players. So for I player in pairs, players get players do, and if that player has an attribute of is survivor, then we want to add to the survivors tally. But if that was the last person we killed, then it's still going to be 0. No one's going to have this attribute anymore, and we can end the game. So if survivors is now equal to 0, then we'll call the, well, actually, we're not going to call the end game function. We're going to change the attribute of game running. So we're going to set game running to false, and then we're going to detect for this attribute inside of our game running loop. So instead of just keeping running all the time, let's just have a check so we can exit out of this loop. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck here. So if workspace get attribute game running, if this is ever equal to false, then we want to break, exit out of this loop and end the game. One more thing we need to change is when the zombie gets killed, we don't actually want them to respawn back in that spawn box. I think how I'd like it to work for this game is the zombies can just keep respawning indefinitely until they've got all the survivors, because they're zombies after all, right? So let's hook into the zombies humanoid again. And this time we can use the died event, connect that to a new function, and we're going to check if the workspace get attribute game running. If that is true, right, so if the game's still happening, then we can spawn them back onto the map. So spawn zombie with that player. So let's test this again with our virtual server. Test and start. We've got these 2 players over here, and then our zombie. So let's track down a survivor. And there's one by the tank, and we'll go and walk into him. And there we go, he's a zombie now, so he spawns at one of the zombie spawns. And there's one more player over here. Where is he? Oh, he's by the cars, and he's got his shotgun. And so if the zombies find their way over to him, and the survivor, oh, and the game's up. Okay, so let's try that again. So if the zombie gets by one of the players, but they get the shotgun out and shoot him, he's just gonna respawn, no problem. But if he does manage to get that player, well, he's going to get turned into a zombie and he gets respawned. And the same for that player as well. So there we go. Our game is pretty much working. We probably don't want to spawn the zombie into a completely random spot again, though. We're probably happy to have them respawned into their last known location. So what we could do is we could have a second value called cframe, and then we could say pivot to cframe, or we'll get a random spawn location. So when we touch someone and we're going to spawn them in, how about we say player.character.primaryPart.cframe, and then the second thing is there's no UI at all to tell us what's going on. So let's create some really quick UI. We'll create a screen GUI and a text label. We'll just throw this across the top of the screen. There we go, like that. Just a few quick visual flourishes. We'll set the default text just to waiting for players. And then we'll add a script right inside, a local script inside of that text label. And here we can control it. Now we can interface directly with those attributes we set on the server, which is nice and handy. Now, if we want to know the current state of the timer, instead of printing out, we can do this through an attribute as well. So we can do workspace set attribute timer and set this to I. We're doing this inside the game, and we could also do this inside the intermission as well, like so. So then when it comes to our local script, all we need to type is workspace get attribute change signal, which is if you've ever used a value object and used the .change property, this is basically the same thing but for attributes. Just the cool thing about attributes is we didn't have to create a bunch of values. They're just kind of ready to go. So we're going to listen it into timer, and then we'll connect that to a function. And let's just check if the game is running now. So if workspace get attribute game running, if it is running, then script.parent.text will equal game and the value of the timer, workspace get attribute timer, with a lowercase t, of course, always very important to make sure things are case sensitive. And then else, if the game isn't actually running, then instead of saying game, we can just say intermission. And that's it. That's the basics of our game all done. 7 lines here and, 109 here. Let's fire up our virtual server again. 3, 2, 1, and here we go. Right, we've got our shotgun out, but the zombie is on the move. And he's moving along, he's zooming along really fast towards the road. And there's a guy by the tank, but he hasn't seen him. And the zombie's going to jump straight over. And oh, he's infected him. Okay, we've got 2 zombies now. A gnome code over here. He's just seen it. He's seen it happen. He's running down the alleyway. But maybe he should be running away because the zombies are closing in. And there we go. They've got all 3 zombies. And it is the end of the round. So that is our round-based game. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful and you've got a little infection game going of your own. So until next time, I'll see you in another video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye!